The missing hostel room. Every university has its secrets. Some stories are just rumors to scare freshmen, but what happened at APEC University in 2024 was not a rumor. It was a cover up. So, if you are a student living in a school hostel right now, listen very closely because after watching this, you will count the rooms on your floor tonight. The boys' hostel at Apex University was old. Block C was the worst. Peeling paint, leaking pipes, and a heavy suffocating smell of damp earth. But the strangest thing about Block C was the room numbering on the first floor. And it goes room 111, room 112, room 113, and room 114. On paper, nothing looked wrong. But the older students always avoid looking at room 113. They said the door felt too cold, even in the middle of a hot afternoon. But students are desperate for accommodations, so every year someone always packed into room 113. And every single year, around the middle of the semester, a student will vanish from that room. The school authority always has the same story to tell, which is either the student drop out or the student travel abroad, because there was no body and no blood. People eventually forgot and moved on. Tunde was a sophomore who loved two things: money and shortcuts. He didn't want to pay the official school accommodation fee because he wanted to buy a new iPhone. One day, Tunde met the hostel porter, an old quiet man named Baba K. Tunde slipped some cash into Baba K's hand and asked for a cheap, unofficial room. At first, Baba K's hand shook, but he took the money. He looked around nervously, then handed Tunde a rusty key with the number 113 scratched into it. Take it, but do not invite guests. Do not look in the mirror after midnight, and whatever you do, if you hear someone scratching the wall from the inside, pack your bags and run. Baba K whispered, his voice cracking. Tunde laughed. He thought Baba K was just an old superstitious man. He collected the key and moved his things into the room that same night. At first, everything was fine. The room was surprisingly large, but it was always freezing. No matter how hot the African sun was outside, inside room 113, Tunde could see the cold moving around as snow. Then the dream started. Every midnight, Tunde dreamed he was trapped inside the dark, tight concrete wall. He couldn't move, he couldn't breathe, and beside him, in the dark, he could hear other people crying and scratching the concrete until their fingernails peeled off. He would wake up gasping for air, his own fingernails bleeding. He thought it was just exam stress. By the third week, the scratching sound wasn't just in his dream anymore. It was coming from the back of his wardrobe, like a desperate animal trying to dig its way out of the wall. Tunde's greed kept him there. He didn't want to leave because he had already spent his accommodation money on his phone. He bought earplugs and be using to ignore the terror. It was a Friday night. The hostel was empty because most students went home for the weekend. Tunde stayed back to study. At exactly 1:13 a.m., the power went out. The hostel became black. I mean black. Suddenly, the air in the room turned ice cold. Tunde's phone screen flickered and died. Then he heard it. Creak! The wardrobe door slowly swung open by itself. From inside the dark wardrobe, a smell filled the room. It was the smell of a rotten corpse mixed with wet mud. Tunde froze in his bed. Terrified, he tried to scream, but no sound came out of his throat. A long, grey skeletal hand stretched out from the back of the wardrobe. The fingernails were torn off, raw and bloody. Then another hand appeared. A figure began to crawl out. It looked like a human, but its body was stretched out, thin and distorted, as if it had been squeezed through a tiny pipe. Its eyes were hollow, bleeding black mud. Tunde watched in horror as the creature crawled towards his bed. It wasn't just one monster. Behind it, Tunde could see the faces of the students who had gone missing in the previous years, all trapped inside the wall, their mouths open in a silent scream. The creature reached Tunde's bed. wrapped its icy bleeding fingers around his ankle and began to drag him toward the wardrobe. Tunde thrashed, trying to hold onto the bed frame, but the strength of the entity was unnatural. Slowly, painfully, Tunde was dragged into the dark, narrow space behind the wardrobe. The wall seemed to soften like wet clay, swallowing him whole. His screams were buried inside the concrete. The next morning, Tunde's parents came to the school. They hadn't heard from their son. They called his classmates, but nobody had seen him. The parents, along with the school security and the dean of students, marched down to Block C to check room 113. When they reached the first floor, they stopped dead in their track. The hallway went room 111, room 112, and then a massive solid blank concrete wall, then room 114. There was no room like 113. There was no door, just a solid wall staring back at them. The dean immediately called the school planning office and demanded the architectural blueprint of Block C. When they opened the master plan drawn up in 1970, everyone in the room turned pale. On the official blueprints, the space between room 112 and room 114 was completely solid. Room 113 did not exist. It had never existed. The school had only built 13 rooms on that floor, but due to an old African curse placed on the land by the villagers before the university was built, a spirit room has manifested itself, a room that fits on human greed. The porter, Baba K, was arrested. In his confession, he wept and said the room demanded a sacrifice every year to keep the rest of the school safe. He used greedy students who wanted cheap, illegal rooms to fit the wall. So my people, there is a deep lesson in this story. Cheap things can cost you your life. Tunde wanted to live a life he couldn't afford. He used his money for luxury and looked for a shortcut for his survival. If he had paid the proper fees and followed the right channel, he would still be alive today. Greed closes our eyes to danger until it's too late. Never let the desire for a deep shortcut lead you into a room you can never escape from. Sleep well tonight and remember to count your doors, because you never want what happened to Tunde happen to you. If you enjoyed this story, do not forget to give this video a like, subscribe and share. Thank you for watching till the end. See you in my next video. Bye.